Okay, welcome. Thank you all so much for joining us here on our Bridging the Broadband Gap. We are thrilled to be here with so many wonderful people in company sharing some of the wonderful work they are doing. We've prepared a full hour for you all, and I'm going to go through a quick agenda right now. We really want to give you an introduction to share more about our Let's Broadband Together project. As well as see some early results from our researchers as we've dug into the first month of the project. We also want to hear from our speakers who are doing some amazing work locally in their communities and on the ground to engage different groups of people. And I know many people have the infrastructure bill on their mind, so we are going to give a quick update on what that looks like. And I know many of you are here to get some tips and tricks on your broadband and internet setup. So we'll talk a little bit about that, answer questions, and then we'll do a quick wrap up. Just some housekeeping before we get started. We are recording because we'd love to send this to all those with you joining us today and afterwards. So just be a little sensitive about any personal information you might share on the call. We are also doing closed captioning so that we want to allow for the most inclusive environment for people to follow along. If you need help closed captioning, check out the instructions in the chat that are just going to be posted, but go to the bottom of your screen and click Enable Captions. We do want to hear from you. This is going to be engaging and fun, and so please join us as we do have chat and questions open. We have the chat on the side, which you are welcome to message. Please make sure you are messaging all panelists and attendees. And we also have the Q&A open, and we have two wonderful colleagues from CR, Tim and Jim, who are going to be there and answering questions and are experts in broadband policy and actually your home Wi-Fi internet connection setup. So feel free to drop them any questions there throughout the call. We do want you to ask questions, so please let us know what's on your mind. And I also just want to let you know that we are enforcing some strict ground rules today on Zoom. When using the chat and questions, please speak from your own experiences, refrain from any personal attacks. Please make sure you are focusing on your personal stories and not stories of other people. The goal of this call and of these issues such as broadband is not to always agree, it's to get a good understanding of how we can work together. And just a little bit of empathy and understanding that there are issues and things that will potentially come up in our internet world. So please be patient as we work through anything like audio things that might come up. Please acknowledge these ground rules, and if there are any issues, we will take action and we will work to connect with you in the best way that we can. Okay, jumping into our call today. We have a lot of speakers, and this is great because we have so many people sharing their expertise and their work with us today. With my colleague, John Schwartz, who is the Senior Policy Counsel for Privacy and Technology at CR. We have Whitney Kimball, the Director of National Programs at Rural Assembly. We have Alejandro Rourke, who is the Executive Director at the Hispanic Technology and Telecommunications Partnership, and Katie Hearn, the Director of the Detroit Community Technology Project. I'm actually going to let everyone introduce themselves in a little bit as we get into our agenda, and they will talk more about themselves, their work, and how they're working with communities on the ground. So we're going to dig straight into broadband as it is right now and why it matters. Many of you are here because you already know this, so we'll talk through really quickly. But there is a lot, and I cannot begin to understate that sentence, a lot happening in the world. We are living in a time that is taking a toll on so many of us, and during the pandemic, we have learned the high value, even more high than some of us thought it was, of the importance of access and connection to internet. And if you are like me, you are constantly working and thinking about how we can make it more accessible and affordable and decrease some of the frustration at living in a nation which we need better broadband and we need more people to have fair and equitable access to it. And we want to work on this. This is something CR actually cares a lot about in creating a fair and just marketplace. And we want to get to the heart of why we are in a place that broadband access is so hard for so many people. So we are coming up to this with full hearts and open minds and seeing how we can tackle this in a view that really works with everyone, both yourselves on this call and people across the nation, to tackle this long-standing question of what can we do to make broadband a place that is fair and just for so many of us. In doing this, we launched a program with a lot of partners from across the nation. Actually, we have a coalition of over 60 organizations to address what is it that we can understand and map across broadband to discuss things like competitive pricing or unfair pricing or speed tests that are not giving you adequate speed. And so we launched the Let's Broadband Together project. We launched that actually in early July, and we are 1 month, which is the halfway point into this project. And at the halfway point, we have so much to celebrate. So far, we have had more than 30,000 participants from across the nation. 30,000, that is not a small number. Yes, I am cheering, I'm waving hands, I am saying thank you for all of you on this call that have already participated. And because of you, we've actually collected over 15,000 internet bills. And this is not a small number in any way. This is many of you sharing with us your frustrations, your confusion over broadband and internet pricing. And we are really looking forward to getting into this data to get to the heart at how we can actually tackle this moving forward. And so we have so many successes already, and we're not done. We're going to keep going. We've got 1 more month in us. But we have had our researchers give an early look at participants of who are coming in and how we can work with individuals to make sure that this data accurately represents individuals across the nation. And so we've learned a lot as well in this half time. And we have a lot of work to do in who we're reaching. And so we really want to create a project that actually reaches all audience. And to do this, we need to invite more communities of color, people living in rural areas, people making less than 70,000 K a year, and many people in states who right now we do not have enough data from. And so if you've ever been a part of these projects, you need data across the board for us to get the full picture. And this is where we're at right now. We figured out we have a lot of data, which is great, and we need a lot more, but we need a lot more centered around communities and people who have had less than obviously good access to date, and really getting them and individuals to participate. And so if you're on this call, there's a few things we need from you with these updates. So on the next slide, if you have done so already, thank you for participating. If you have participated and not uploaded your bill, please upload your bill. If I can explain to you how far that goes, that really gets us to a data point further than just speed tests, and really allows us to actually map the data in a way we have never been able to do before. So that is very helpful. And also an extra ask, if you know someone in the gaps or the areas in which we haven't been able to reach and get representation as fully as we want to yet, please consider today asking a friend, a family, or community member to join us. And even if everyone on this call just asks one person, that is a lot of people, and that helps us get the spread. I know you have all taken so much time and energy into participating so far, and we really, really appreciate that. And we really want to make sure that this data is representative, that this data is inclusive, that this data actually means something for all of us who have participated so far. But in order to do that, we need all of your help, and we need help making sure that everyone is participating. So I'm going to say this again at the end, but can you help us by sharing with one more person? Because that would definitely make my day, and that would help all of us get the access to the data that we need to help advocate for better broadband. So that is definitely an overview of the Let's Broadband Together project. And again, thank you so much for being here, for helping participate, for joining us, and being with us on this road as we get to this. We are obviously in a timeline where we are going to collect data for the next month continuously, and then be able to gather that data and share more of what it's doing, what it's feeling like, what it's looking like, what it's telling us, all these questions we have. I've got tons of them myself. And we will be reporting back in September and October on what we're finding from all this research with you, the participants. Okay, if you've got questions about the project, drop them in the chat or the Q&A. We are going to be there to answer them, but that is a high-level overview, and stay tuned to more emails with more information. I am actually going to kick it off to some of our speakers that are here today, who are doing the work as it relates to broadband on the ground. So Whitney Ko, can I pass it to you from Rural Assembly to share more about your work?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that introduction. My name is Whitney Kimball Ko. I am with the Rural Assembly, which is a program of the Center for Rural Strategies, and I'm calling in today from Athens, Tennessee, which is a small town in between Knoxville to the north and the gig city, Chattanooga, to the south in East Tennessee. And it is raining really hard today, so I'm really excited that I have a pretty good connection. I hope you all can hear me. The Center for Rural Strategies has been around since 2001, and we're located in the coal fields of Kentucky, but we have a staff that are spread out. We're a small but mighty nonprofit that is interested in the flourishing of rural America so that the rest of the nation can flourish as well. So we use media and communications to tell stories, to connect people, to help humanize all of us in ways that will build a future that is more inclusive, that's greener and smarter. We have two big programs. One is the Daily Yonder, and I'm a little biased, but I think it might be some of the best rural news and reporting that's out there. It is a rural news publication, dailyyonder.com, and you can get all kinds of rural, cultural, and policy news there. Rural Assembly is what I direct, and it's where we house our work around broadband advocacy and broadband policy. And we've been working as a Rural Assembly since 2008, really, on this. We are a collection of rural leaders from all 50 states, even some international places, and we look for ways to connect around issues that matter to rural populations and then amplify them with national groups who can help us carry the work forward. And broadband, boy, that is a really, really big one. And broadband is a real gnarly mess, as we all know. So it's 2021 and we're still talking about it and the inequities around it and why can't we get it in rural places. And one of the ways I like to think about it is it reminds me of kind of like a necklace, you know, that is all messed up and tangled, and we all have to be pulling on it in the right places to make sure that we're making this happen. And it's taking a long time. Why is it taking a long time? So if we could go to the next slide. There are a lot of reasons why it's taking a long time, but here are the three or four big ones, I think. The two on your screen, you've got a list of the Daily Yonder's classifications of counties, and the green counties are the rural counties. So rural makes up about 80% of the land and about 15 to 20% of the population. But we know that a lot of things we don't know. A lot of things we don't know about who's connected and how well they're connected. So one of the biggest problems we face is knowing how the speeds and how well people are connected across the country. And the only way we know that at this moment is really through FCC maps, which are the information that comes to them through providers like telecoms, as opposed to consumers. So whatever the FCC says is really a narrative that comes from the providers themselves. So we need better data. So that's something that we know we need to be working on. And it's something the Rural Assembly has been working on for a while. Maps should really include the customer's actual experience on the ground, using the infrastructure and whether broadband is affordable. And then there's this issue of affordability and lack of competition, right? So over 70% of American households only have the choice of one or two broadband providers. And this contributes to artificially high prices for services. We know that rural subscribers and tribal subscribers are paying up to about 37% more for broadband than those in built up areas. So these higher prices are often considered the primary reason why people do not subscribe to broadband services at home. We also know that according to a recent report from the Joint Center for Political and Economic Studies, It shows that 38% of Black Americans do not have access to home internet in the Black rural South. And they are by far one of the most underserved areas and communities in our country, hence why Consumer Reports is asking for more information about these communities, because we know that they are some of the most underserved and lacking in providers. I will say that one size doesn't fit all. So we've been throwing money at this problem for a long time from federal sources and other types of investments, but somehow it's not sticking. And I think a lot of that has to do with affordable high-speed internet. Bringing it to rural America requires thinking smaller, one community at a time. We live in very different geographies. We have different networks set up. We've got different kinds of leadership and different kinds of assets in our spaces. So a blanket pot of money doesn't necessarily address the real problems we face on the ground. So we really need to focus on local solutions. And that's something that the Rural Assembly is very keen about, is lifting up what are some of those local solutions. If you could go ahead and push that slide forward. I know I've got limited amount of time. So I just want to share with you that from our perspective, any policy that we make about broadband, any effort we make to connect people should be premised on these 4 principles. And I feel free to take these and inscribe them on your heart. Communication is a human right. Rural America is diverse, and that goes back to this one size doesn't fit all. Rural America represents many different backgrounds, experiences, cultures, ethnicities, and geographies. So we know that local ownership and investment in community has got to be a priority. And then, of course, network neutrality and open access are important and vital. Let's go on. In my last slide, I just want to share this from our youth cohort that we get to organize with through the Rural Assembly. They came up with this mission statement for rural America, and I like to share it with everyone because it seems like such a reasonable gambit for all of us. So I'm just going to read this slide. We demand of ourselves a proactive and invested community that has quality healthcare, adequate housing, and enlightened education in a safe and sustainable environment where no person goes thirsty, hungry, or homeless, and every person is accepted, no matter who your mama is. All these things done with love tell the story of our futuring rural communities. And we know that broadband is a central piece of that story. So let's get into the gnarliness of it and start pulling in the right directions and together, I think.
Thank you so much, Whitney. That is a really powerful vision statement. And I feel it so much, but I also feel it because I'm like, that's human needs. That is what we all deserve. And I really appreciate all the work of Rural Assembly, bringing that to communities and helping uplift those voices. So thank you. We're going to pass it off to Alejandro Rourke, who is joining us today from the Hispanic Technology and Telecommunication Partnership, also known as HTTP. I love the acronym. We're here for it. Feel free to dig right in, Alejandro.
How's it going? And thank you to Consumer Reports for having me. So like you mentioned, my name is Alejandro Rourke, and I am the Executive Director for Hispanic Technology and Telecommunications Partnership. We are essentially a CEO roundtable of 16 of the country's oldest and largest Latino civil rights organizations who work in partnership to promote access, adoption, and the full utilization of technology and telecommunications resources by the Latino community across the United States. And what we saw, I think, throughout the course of the global health crisis is, we saw pictures, heartbreaking pictures of Latina students attempting to do their homework in a Taco Bell parking lot. We saw friends and family members in long lines at the unemployment offices as Latinos faced, record job losses, specifically Latina women, many of whom work in the service industry or whose jobs disappeared overnight. And we are now seeing, the low vaccination rates within our community. And perhaps because the primary way that anyone could get a vaccine in the early stages was by making an appointment through online, through oftentimes outdated government websites. Each of these scenarios really tell the story of what happens when Latino households don't have access to reliable, high-speed internet at home. Their 2 little girls could have continued their classwork at home. the people who had to wait in long lines and expose themselves unnecessarily to the virus could have enrolled for unemployment benefits online and used the internet as a resource to learn new skills or to find another job. And Latino households with an internet connection would have had a much easier time accessing credible information about the vaccine, or be able to navigate the sometimes complicated government websites that would have allowed them to get the vaccine sooner. In the United States, only 65% of Latino households have an at-home broadband connection compared to 80% of white households. And the number one most cited reason for not having an at-home subscription is the price. That is the primary barrier. So in fact, a household's annual income is directly correlated to whether or not they have broadband at home. Pew Research found that those households that earned between 60 or 50K and below are the least likely to be able to afford having an at-home broadband subscription. And it's also important to know that the median household income for Hispanic households across the country is $56,000 a year, which is why, this past year, we were really focused on the Emergency Broadband Benefit Program. We worked with Congress, we worked with the FCC to ensure that all Latino families were able to participate regardless of their immigration status or zip code. And because the emergency broadband benefit directly addresses the main barrier to adoption cited most by Latino communities, and really creates what I believe to be an on-ramp to not just digital opportunity, but it helps Latino families reach new possibilities in education and healthcare and employment. And that is why we created the IBB Parami National Public Awareness Campaign in partnership with our national civil rights organizations to ensure that our community knows about the program and is supported to every part of the enrollment process, and provides them with guidance about how to select an internet service provider or a service plan that meets their family's needs and long-term budget. We really just see this program as an important on-ramp to digital connectivity. And we also know that the FCC has limited capacity to do community outreach. I think all of us that do a lot of community-facing work don't have the capacity to oftentimes translate a lot of these issues or these government programs in a meaningful way. And so we really wanted to develop, not just an information resource for Latino households wanting to enroll, but also for community advocates that wanted to help people navigate the enrollment process. So I'm happy to kind of share that link in the chat so you guys can explore. But I'll just kind of leave it at that. We are just as invested, like Katie mentioned, on having accurate maps, ensuring that we have digital skills training, and that we have choices when it comes to internet in our local communities, and that most importantly, that those choices are affordable options that everybody can access. So thank you guys for kind of inviting us to join the conversation, and we're happy to kind of continue to contribute as we move the conversation forward.
Thank you so much, Alejandro. I see we got one more slide on how the EBP works. There is a link in the chat, and I know, Alejandro, you've just shared the one specifically that you were going through. So super helpful if people have questions. I am not an EBP pro, but I know that we can help answer and navigate for those who might need some support. I also find the charts that you showed so compelling to understanding the landscape of access. And as we talk about access and affordability, and Whitney touched on this as well, and I know Katie's going to go through it, it's a matter of who is accessing, and able to get both the internet and these resources is so important. So thank you. And Katie, we are so excited to have you come on board from the Detroit Community Technology Project. So take it away.
Yes, thank you so much. It's wonderful to be here and in such fantastic company. Thank you both to Whitney and Alejandro for your amazing work. As Amira mentioned, my name is Katie Hearn. I serve as the director for the Detroit Community Technology Project. And our mission is to build and use technology that fosters stronger relationship between neighbors in tech, and between neighbors and their environment. So in short, we also hold that communication is a fundamental human right. And we believe that digital equity is and must be rooted in racial equity. So for us, we aim to take things a step further than equity and really focus on justice, which is actually great timing. why this timeline is here. It's important for me to note that our organization is born from a long organizing history here in the city of Detroit that really begins with the Detroit Digital Justice Coalition, the DDJC, back in 2009. This coalition formed to really pursue broadband technology opportunity funds, and was really a convening across different issue areas, whether it's environmental justice, welfare rights, et cetera, to really ask the question, are we organizing for a definition that someone made up, or are we organizing for healthy digital ecosystems as those people that have consistently found themselves on the margins of connectivity? So Detroit is one of the last remaining primarily Black cities in the nation. It's also one that's been kind of jostling for a top spot on the least connected cities list. We have a very long history, as much as we do of organizing, right, of things like digital redlining and lacking infrastructure or disinvestment in our communities. So as many of you may hear great stories about how the city of Detroit is quote unquote coming back, it's important to note that many of our Black and Brown communities have been systemically excluded from that progress, and that often began with digital redlining. So the numbers that you've heard from the other organizations are actually quite similar. We find a lot of similarity between our urban center and rural communities when we look at the rates of disconnection and disinvestment in infrastructure. So, we have the opportunity to learn from this long organizing history of the Digital Justice Coalition that for our communities, it matters that we work in principle. So the Detroit Digital Justice Coalition's organizing principles include the tenets of access, participation, common ownership, and healthy communities. And those 4 tenets are really what guide our work as the Detroit Community Technology Project. So it's a long kind of process to get to where we are now, but the DDJC was able to partner with folks at the Open Technology Institute and Allied Media Projects to pilot a training program for digital stewardship. So fast forward now to 2015, 2016, DCTP was able to launch the Equitable Internet Initiative. You can keep going. EII is really our effort to redistribute power and resources and access to decision-making by making internet technologies more available to those that have historically been marginalized. So EII for us, you can advance one further, please. EII for us is a way to marry both community organizing and wireless engineering skills that our digital stewards learn to actually employ those most marginalized historically to build and maintain gigabit speed wireless networks in their neighborhood. So this is an effort for us to essentially bring folks into the fold to create and generate their own solutions for this issue. And this is something that, we're talking with folks across the world about, because what we realize when we talk about accessibility, when we talk about affordability, when we talk about adoption, what matters most is actually focusing the people on the equation and not just the dollar amounts or the technology. So for us, it really is about creating a stronger relationship between those that have been marginalized and the technology that would really open a wealth of doors when we're talking about being able to participate in the job market, to participate in civic engagement activities, and really to be able to stay connected in our quickly changing world. You can advance one further, please. I mentioned principles earlier, and that's kind of where we stem from in our organizational history. But the Equitable Internet Initiative is really, I think, a champion in terms of really looking to the people that are doing the work on the ground to say, how should this technology interact with your community where you live? So this is an example. It's kind of hard to read, but I'll share the link as well. This is an example of folks that have been trained as digital stewards, coming together across very different neighborhoods in the city of Detroit and agreeing about how they will work together and how they will bring their neighbors into the fold without replicating harm that we often see when we're talking about incumbent telecoms. If you advance one further, please. really the bulk of this really boils down to the fact that we are trying to decentralize what it means to be connected to the internet. So for us, it means partnering with anchor organizations who have a strong track record in their communities and believe in not just digital equity, but digital justice. It means really thinking about what it means once you're online. So if we're considering safety, privacy, and consent, our networks do practice net neutrality. We have spelled out our privacy policies and our terms of use, and our digital stewards are translating that information for their communities, walking people through it to ensure that there's an understanding of what they're signing up for. But also we're planning for our changing climate and understanding that when communication goes down, as it often does, say in the North End Detroit with a lot of lacking infrastructure there, in Southwest Detroit, where if it rains, you're losing connectivity. How do we ensure that our neighbors are prepared and our internet technologies can also rely on solar, can also rely on can create systems for mutual aid when the communication might be down, but our devices can still communicate over our network. So I'm saying quite a bit to say. If you want, there's just some photos here ahead, but what we're really trying to do here is position those most impacted by the digital divide at the forefront of solving that issue. And in many cases, that means creating the infrastructure that's missing through wonderful partnership, but also ensuring that we're creating jobs in some way that allow people to live work where they live, and to have an impact, so that we're not just seeing outside organizations, largely corporations, coming in and making decisions for our communities now that there's funding flowing through from federal and state levels. It's very, very important that, as you know, all of us here on this call are trudging ahead and thinking fast about how to seize this moment, that we continue to center those that have been pushed to the margins and amplify the voices, because at the end of the day, anything that we try to do in terms of adoption will fail if we aren't hearing from those that haven't had the opportunity to adopt already. So that may be my time. I'll try to share some other links in the chat as well. But more than anything, I hope that we're able to have great conversations about who's missing, whose voices should be amplified, and overall how we can truly unite around this issue and hopefully solve things once and for all, even if it takes us a slow crawl. Thank you.
Thank you, Katie. As someone who's followed Detroit Community Tech Project for so long, I've always been in awe on the centering of community and people, and I feel like that was really evident throughout all the things you've said. I still have one of my flip books from like four years ago or something when they first came out, so I do treasure all the resources that are constantly being put out by the org. Katie, Whitney, and Alejandra, thank you so much. I could talk about why all your work's so important, but I feel like you all just shared that so much with us. And that is at the heart why we know there are so many orgs already working in this, working with communities, working with people, and why we did want to become partners in the Let's Broadband Together project with your orgs and so many other orgs that are doing the important work you are. So thank you for joining us. And if you have questions for any of our speakers, please do drop them in. We're going to talk a little bit about the infrastructure bill and some broadband tips, but we are going to be coming back for Q&A with everyone. So if you have questions, get them ready. We'll be able to address some of them in a bit. But for now, I'm going to pass off to my colleague, Jonathan Schwartz, who has been keeping a really close eye on this infrastructure bill. And we want to go through where is broadband in it and what are we seeing in the successes and moving forward and what we can expect in the fall.
Great, thanks, Amira. And I share my thanks to my fellow panelists for being here today and contributing to this session. My name is John Schwartz. I'm a senior policy counsel with Consumer Reports. I work in our advocacy division and I'm based in the Washington, D.C. office. As I noticed in a very robust chat that's going on here during our time together today, I believe John Eldon mentioned that broadband is very much infrastructure. We very much agree. In fact, even more so now in the pandemic, we've become painfully aware of how important a reliable, fast, and affordable broadband connection is to participate in day-to-day activities. In fact, at Consumer Reports, we polled consumers earlier this year, and we found that 76%, more than 3 out of 4 Americans believe that broadband is as important as water or electricity. So think about that. But unlike water and electricity, it's not treated as a public utility. All that is to say, there was a lot of broadband debate that took place during the infrastructure bill that passed exactly a week ago in the Senate, and $65 billion total. Again, this is not law yet. It has to pass the House, and President Biden has assured us he signed it into law. See what the House does when they come back next week. But $42.5 billion direct to the states and territories to build out broadband infrastructure with a preference for areas that are unserved. We would like to have seen it be a bigger pot of money, but that's a really good start, seeing that as a glass half full. We very much wanted to focus on, if you receive money from Uncle Sam, that you include a low-cost option. They kind of left that to be TBD as to term of how much that's going to cost and what the speed requirements are for that low-cost option, but we're happy to see that included to try to address the affordability issue. Next slide, please. This is something that it was near and dear to our hearts at Consumer Reports, because we believe in price transparency first and foremost, and as many people in the chat have indicated, it's very confusing. Whether it's the fees, whether it's you're in a bundled package. Some bills don't even list, if you're in a bundled package, what the price for internet is, or you've got a great price for a year and then it magically goes up 30, 40 bucks because your promotion ended and that wasn't really made entirely clear by the ISP. We're really hoping that if this consumer broadband label, which has been around now for 4 or 5 years, the FCC developed it in cooperation with industry and consumer groups like those of us on the call here today, modeled after a nutrition facts label, just to get down to the basics of what you're paying for internet and what are all these extra crazy fees and when does your promotion end. Also $14.2 billion to extend the emergency broadband benefit program. They want to rename that the Affordable Connectivity Program. And importantly, we hope this funding, and it's no longer tied to COVID or the national emergency declaration. So we really hope this program has a very long future and future support by the federal government. Also $2.75 billion over 5 years for programs we've been fighting for years to boost digital equity, inclusion, and literacy programs. This is really going to go to what a lot of my colleagues on the panel spoke to us today. Get this money out of Washington and get it down at the community level, both rural and urban. Next slide, please. Let's get into some very, CR practical tips. My colleague Jim Wilcox, whom I work with very closely as one of our journalists, writes many articles on these topics. And when you work at Consumer Reports, everybody wants to ask me how can I improve my internet service? Well, I'll start by saying, it's not in the slide, and I'm just kind of reacting to the chat. It really much depends upon the tech you have available to you in your home. If you've got DSL, that has a real limitation as to how fast it can go. Fiber, cable coax, and then satellite. They're all very different. Some do better than others, but by and large, as the chat has indicated, fiber is the best. You have symmetrical speeds, meaning your upload's as fast as your download. So I just wanted to say that, meaning I can give you these tips, but there just might not be anything you can do if you're stuck with DSL. And that comes into a lot of questions we can maybe try to answer. But the first thing is to check your speed. Do a speed test. Just Google internet speed test. Just take the test. It does help if you go old school and plug your computer directly into your router or modem. I mean, I haven't done that in many years, but you could do that as a good control. See if that speed is higher than when you unplug and then use your Wi-Fi network. If your Wi-Fi speed is substantially lower, you might have a problem with your equipment, that being your modem router. Nowadays, that's typically all included in one. It sounds almost silly, but unplug it and plug it back in. Sometimes you're resetting your modem router can fix the problems. There just might be a variety of issues going on. And oftentimes if you're on customer service for a half hour, that's all they'll tell you to do. So just do that on your own. But if you're finding you have dramatic speeds, you might have to call the cable company and figure out what's going on. Next slide. So if you rent the router, go ahead and call them once you get through the customer service and see that if they have a new router that they're, sometimes you might have a router that you've been renting for 5 to 10 years that just might be old tech, and if you're going to rent, you may as well rent the best. They typically don't charge more for the newer routers. This happened to me. Try moving the router around. I mean, if you're now working from home, you might be just too physically far away from your router. So try to centrally locate that in your home. Or in my case, I had a router that was just way too old. So if you want to avoid paying those rental fees and you haven't bought a new router in a while, that might actually be kind of like upgrading your technology. That helped, because they do have a limited range, the Wi-Fi signal. A Wi-Fi extender can also help. That's like a little satellite, like sort of an antenna booster that you can deploy in your house. And the fanciest thing you can do is get a mesh router, which kind of has like a home base and then these little pods that you distribute throughout your house to enhance and spread the signal throughout your home. Next slide. All right, this is where I get to stop talking and we get to the real fun part, which is Q&A. So Amira, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thanks, John. Those are great tips. And just a reminder, if you have other questions that are very specific to your internet or connection, please do jump in the Q&A. And we're going to start taking questions. So if you have any other questions for our speakers or anyone else, please do drop them in the Q&A, because we are going to pull a bunch from there. But I just want to connect with Whitney, Alejandro, and Katie. Aside from the tips that we've shared, have you noticed any other tips working specifically with communities that you're working with? Katie, someone has written in the comments specifically for rural populations, like how can they improve their connections and access to these sort of resources? I'm not sure if you have an answer to that or some thoughts around what we can do. But if you have other tips, I'd love to just continue a dialogue on specifically tips and actions.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to jump in, and I'm reading through the chat, and I think it just really illustrates how some of us are able to live in this bubble where we are connected and I turn on my computer and everything works fine. And there's so many of us, right, that have spotty connection or don't have the infrastructure that's necessary to connect, which really limits our ability to participate. I think that what I'm excited about today in this moment is that we have a unique opportunity to use every tool in our toolbox to connect every home. And each of us has a very important voice in helping to make that happen. Like Katie said, every community has different terrain, different demographics, varying funding capacity. And I think if our goal is to make broadband accessible and affordable to everyone, then we need to first understand what resources are already available in our community to really understand the depth of the digital divide. And when we're able to do that, and when we're able to clearly articulate that, then we can bring everyone to the table to establish a statewide broadband plan that not only addresses affordability, but access, adoption, and digital preparedness. And I think that that's really the best way to kind of meet our community's digital connectivity needs, right? Because there is no one size fits all. In some areas, it does make sense to establish a municipal broadband network or a co-op. In other places, it's critical that we talk about, infrastructure and deploying to rural areas. But states that have really been able to lead and connect their citizens and benefit from the economic output that comes from connecting everybody to the digital economy are those that are first and foremost invested in building their own local leadership capacity. When I think of critical infrastructure, I think of the importance of establishing statewide offices, digital equity officers, state broadband officers who understand the current state of broadband infrastructure and are able to meaningfully engage diverse stakeholders, members of historically excluded communities, along with policymakers and industry leaders to carve a path forward that will stretch our taxpayer dollars in a way that is efficient and is able to connect as many people as possible as soon as possible. And that's where I think that we all have such an important power to really kind of shape not only the present, but the future, right? But it's just engaging in those conversations with our local leaders to ensure that we are developing thoughtful and meaningful solutions that doesn't leave anybody out.
Mm-hmm. And I'll just add to that as someone who lives in a rural place and talks to a lot of folks who maybe are not, aware of a lot of the advocacy efforts that do exist, that a lot of this does have to do with advocacy and becoming an advocate for yourself and for your community. And some of the, just kind of lower hanging fruit is making sure that policies at the state and national level aren't cutting off options to the assets that you have in your community, like co-ops or like municipal broadband networks. I happen to live in a state that prevents us from really digging into those municipal broadband network options. So we need to be advocating with our state leaders. I need to be talking to my city manager just across the way and letting him know that, this isn't working out for us. It doesn't matter if I turn on or off my router. I maybe even don't have a router. So getting into the advocacy piece of this is kind of essential. There's also the convening piece, which I think for institutions, local institutions, whether it's the United Way or the YMCA or a local co-op or a leadership group in your community that can host conversations about this to help people get up to speed, no pun intended, on the wonkiness of getting connected. That's a wonderful role that a lot of people could be playing right now, is that convening role. Also, we do need local broadband plans and mapping. So understanding who is connected in your community and who is not, and how well those connections work, all those things. Data is power. So doing some of that mapping. That first question I asked, why are we still here in 2021, is because it's almost like broadband is moving at the pace of relationships and trust, and then finally working together in an advocacy kind of capacity to build these bridges. But to all of you out there who have a rural neighbor, or you yourself are experiencing serious connectivity issues, I'm so sorry. It is so hard. And I think saying that and saying it loudly to people around you is really important.
And I'm going to dig up actually a link from the FCC, because a lot of these unideal kind of like user experiences, the FCC wants to hear about it, right? They have just a quick form that you can, everything that you're writing in the chat, you can submit directly to the FCC, and the FCC will investigate. They'll reach out to your internet service provider. They'll say, look, these are the speeds that you told us you were providing, but this consumer that is subscribed to your service is not getting these speeds, right? So I think that let me pull out that link and put it in the chat, because these are all things that the FCC absolutely wants to hear from you guys, and they're ready to take action. They're also our advocates. So I'm happy to kind of put that in the chat for everyone.
Thank you for those thoughts. I mean, the only thing I would add is that, the reason I was so excited to hear about Broadband Together is I think that speed testing is actually a fantastic entree to conversations with your neighbors, with your colleagues who are also dropping off of the Zoom call, et cetera. So speaking of becoming or remaining our own advocates, there's these small steps, right, that really, I think, add up when we're thinking about understanding the actual landscape of this divide, the factors that played in at the beginning and have really effectively maintained the status quo of these providers. It's important for us to more and more engage in casual conversation about what's going on with our internet, what's going on with these providers, what their relationships are when we're thinking about our school districts, when we're thinking about new developments coming into play in our communities. How can we just generally know more as a people about what's happening behind these closed doors? Because the more that we at least understand the different pieces at play, the more we can advocate for ourselves, and the more that we are able to shape that data into compelling narratives about what should be happening and what we're really seeing on the ground. So thank you so much. Broadband Together campaign is amazing to me, and really excited to see this chat popping off. Thank you, Alejandro, for lifting up that toolkit.
Thanks all. And I really appreciate the emphasis on advocacy as a pathway for people to participate and go forward. And I'm noticing a couple things in the questions in the chat is like, one, people are talking about there being low competition, and how do you bring in more options, which we know can reduce the pricing, because obviously there's not a monopoly. And there's also questions on how can individuals best approach and push municipal broadband at city councils. And so as like individuals who are watching this, like what are the moves they can take on local levels to ensure, to support rural communities, to open up open up ideas on city councils or others, and to have more of these conversations that center around access and allowing more people in and more opportunities for local broadband experiences. It's a big question, I know. So don't worry, I understand if it takes a few minutes to think it through.
Yeah, and this conversation I think has been kind of high level. We've covered a lot of ground, but I mean, as everybody kind of has said, you know, the digital equity gap is a multidimensional problem, and it requires action on all fronts. I think that what's good is that the Biden administration is really trying to be innovative, open, and flexible to try new ideas and new approaches, you know, like the emergency broadband benefit program, which is necessary for low-income households. Meaningful competition is important. Extending our infrastructure to rural communities is important. And I think that we all need to work to establish an equitable baseline of access with new thinking, new tools, and with the spirit of collaboration. And I believe that the Biden administration really is doing that. I believe that Acting Chairwoman Rosenworcel at the FCC is doing that. And I've seen internet service providers come to the table in ways that I haven't before. So I think that really today is a time when everybody is listening. They want to hear about your experience on the ground, and we're all looking for, you know, better models to ensure that nobody is left out and is excluded. You know, we have the Digital Connectivity Fund, you know, that just launched a few weeks ago, which is all about schools and libraries, right? We have the Rural Opportunity Grant. There's really so many big pots of money that have been made available, including coming up in the infrastructure package. And like I said, I think that right now is really a great moment for our communities and community leaders to come together to really establish a thoughtful plan so that we are meeting, you know, the real needs of our community, instead of, I think, having a very prescriptive kind of federal option that we expect is going to work everywhere. And, you know, I think that we all have a voice in figuring out what that solution can and will be.
Mm-hmm. And, you know, sometimes broadband is an extension of a larger conversation that we need to be having with our neighbors and community members around equity, justice, and where we are in this moment and what are the things we value, and building that common narrative. I think all of us are tasked or called to different ways of showing up in community right now. And maybe it's not just talking about broadband, right? It's talking about what is the future of our life together here, and how do we build systems and build relationships in ways that that really do center those people whom we've left on the margins. So I just want to name that as like, and it's one of the reasons why I shared that last mission statement from the Youth Assembly members. You know, I think all of us are seeking a life of flourishing and belonging and connection, and broadband is just a piece of that. But if that's the lens that we're bringing to all of the development that we're seeking in our lives and in our communities, that's a place to start with those conversations.
Really appreciate that, Whitney. Thank you. I wholeheartedly agree. I think it is a matter of a larger conversation to be had. And you know, I mentioned climate briefly, but, you know, a lot of times the intersections that are apparent in talking about this digital divide, they're apparent when we're thinking about good jobs, when we're thinking about resilient communities in the face of flooding, fire, et cetera. You know, the fact of the matter is there hasn't been a plan to bring our cities and towns up to speed, in many cases for a reason. And I think it's important that we address that reason, whether we're talking rural or we're talking urban, whether we're talking, you know, unconnected or underconnected, there's a reason there. And I think it's important to really dig into that, but also to understand that now is the time for reparative action, because at the end of the day, it's not enough to be excited about the digital divide now if it's really a part of a customer acquisition plan, right? This is the time to really hold for ourselves the vision that we have for our future, the future that we deserve, and how these other entities play into that, what we expect of our local governments, our state governments and beyond, what we expect of the folks that we're paying for service, and also what we expect when we're thinking about the margins, when we're thinking about the trust issues that do exist and how we can really create solutions at various levels, right? So we're not necessarily trying to fix the broken machine and call it a day, right? We're thinking about various alternatives that can serve us, whether we're talking about the margins or we're talking about, our innovation districts. So just thank you again, Whitney, for that comment. And I hope that, at the end of the day, what we're talking about here is the future and how we're going to get ready for it.
That feels like a wonderful note for us to kind of envision that future on. So thank you so much, Katie, for leaving us with that, Whitney for sharing, Alejandro for jumping in and joining the chat as well. So much thank you for all the thoughts. This is complicated and there are a lot of stakeholders involved, and I truly believe it takes collaboration across organizations, municipal and state groups and federal levels for us to set the tone going forward in the next fall and to really help build deeper commitments to broadband locally to reach so many communities, both who have low access and low service right now or who do not have any at all. And so are very underserved. Thank you so much for the robust conversation, and thank you so much for all of you joining us today. After this call, we're going to send out an email, usually in 24 hours, that will send all the links that have been shared. So if you haven't caught them up, don't worry. We'll send a recording to the video in case you want to go through any of the parts that you might have missed or you need to rehear for some inspiration. Also, don't forget to share out the broadbandtogether.org site. I've just shared it in the chat again. And if you have any questions or any thoughts or ideas on how we can access some of the communities where we want to reach, or simply to ask us any questions related to broadband and how we can support you, please drop us a line at community@cr.consumer.org. We are so excited to continuously be on this path to helping really connect all of us across the nation, and we really appreciate you all tuning in with us today. So thank you all.
Thank you, guys.